such a tough lineup to follow. Uh, just before I start, I thought I'll take a couple of questions as a poll. How many of you use the race course? You raise your hands, I'm not asking for questions. Right. How many of you all are concerned about the current plans at the race course? Right, so I see there's a tremendous amount of interest. Now, I live very close to the race course. I'm a member of the Amateur Riders Club. I've used it often, and I'm fairly concerned about the proposed plans. Better now? Now, of course, those are my personal views, and I'm sure you have your personal views as well. But what I'm here to talk to you about is that in every single discussion, including the race course as an example, there is a different perspective. So I want to, in the course of today's talk, explore that different perspective and perhaps leave you a little more confused than you were when you came here. And maybe confused is not the right word, just accepting of a different perspective, that alone would be sufficient. Now, before I get to the actual perspective, a little bit of history which is fairly interesting about the racecourse. So originally the racecourse was a marsh. It used to get flooded by the tides on a daily basis. It was then protected and became usable by the construction of the Hornby Vellard, which interestingly was built by a man called William Hornby. He was the governor of Bombay at that time and had been told by the East India Company specifically, please don't waste more money on Bombay. He did, and he built all these things, including the Hornby Vellard. He was then suspended by the East India Company and told to step down. But at that time, because it was so long to get from England to India, he refused to step down. So he actually stood in office despite being suspended as governor. Now, I mean, some things about politicians don't change. So that's how it actually became usable. In 1883, a racecourse was built over that land. And in 1914, that's more than a century ago, a lease was given to the Turf Club to operate that racecourse and the land around it. Now, we see it as a fairly, sorry if you can go back. Yep. We see it as a huge open space in Bombay. 1933 is an important year for what we're going to discuss today, because that is the year there was a statutory protection. Now, that means that the law specifically says, identifies this piece of land and says that this piece of land will always be protected as an open space. That's what the legal position is. Now, the lease expired in 2013 by everybody. There was a lot of controversy about whether it was renewed, not renewed, etc. But in 2013, it did expire. Till 2023, lease rental was accepted by the state government and by the municipality in respect of this land. Now, that's till 2023, after which the Turf Club stays in that entire area without a valid and subsisting lease and without paying lease rental. So that's the history of this place. Now consider what is proposed. It was widely reported that on 6th December 23, there was a meeting at the house of the Chief Minister. The Turf Club, the corporation and the state were represented, and they came up with this plan. Now the plan is something like this. 90 acres were to be retained by the Turf Club. 120 acres was to be taken over by the state government and the MCGM for the development of what they called, and I'm quoting exactly, a public garden stroke international theme park. Now what is anyway, I'll come to that in a minute. But that is what they said, that's what they said they'll use it for. What it also contained as a proposal was that 50 free life memberships would be given to the Chief Minister to give to whoever he wanted. Similar, a smaller number was given to the municipal corporation, and that they themselves would be free life members, and every year they would get to nominate more people for free life membership. Now, obviously, this gave rise to a huge amount of outrage. There were two very quick climb downs. The first climb down was the municipal commissioner said that yes, this international theme park is such a vague thing, but we don't propose to do that. We propose to have a public garden. The second climb down was in a hearing before the Bombay High Court. The Advocate General of Maharashtra said that we don't intend to take these free life memberships, nor do we intend to nominate our friends and family to free life membership. So those were the two quick climb downs to perhaps the most outrageous aspect of the proposal. So the proposal as currently, and I'm going to now give you a perspective of the status quo and the benefits of the status quo, which are widely kind of regarded as to be the benefits, fairly obvious. The first one is that it's an open space. Everything around is a huge concrete jungle with the high-rises coming, all across Parel, all across Mahalakshmi. So it's an open space. Secondly, the entire open area is accessible to the public. In 1967, when the lease was renewed, one of the conditions was that you have to allow the public to access the entirety of it. It's not widely known, but it is accessible to the public and you can walk in whenever you want, as a lot of you must have. Third, the entire space is open for equine sports. You've got dressage, you've got show jumping, you've got the actual races, of course, and the space inside is used for those equine sports, polo. Fourth, it is used as a catchment area in terms of the flooding that we represent with our monsoons in Bombay. You've got a porous piece of land of 200 odd acres where the water can be absorbed, apart from all these metalled and tarred roads all around. And fifth, that it serves as a green lung for our society. All the plans that are proposed require some level of construction. In fact, the proposed plan contemplates a huge clubhouse to be built and an entire multi-story stable to be built for the horses. So this permanent or open land is certainly going to change. We've got thereafter an obvious, in that sense, it would require the law to be amended and create that ability to construct on what is otherwise designated as permanent open land. Sounds like a slam dunk, right? Where's the question of any perspective that would support development on the racecourse land? Now let's just examine that in a little more detail. Let me give you an example. Many of you may own flats. You may have given some of those flats on rental to somebody or the other. You give it for a specific term. You give it for 5 years, you give it for 3 years, whatever it might be. The person pays you lease rental. Now suppose the lease term runs out. The person has in that sense offered the same lease rental, but you want to use it. Can anyone tell you that no, sorry, you can't in that sense take back the flat, you must allow him to use it at the rate that was agreed? That's obviously not something that any of y'all would support for a private piece of land. Why should it be any different for the state government and the MCGM? It's admitted that the state and the MCGM own the land. Why can they not have, in that sense, a right to use the land in a manner that they deem appropriate? Now let's deal with each of those issues that we explored about what is the benefit of having that racecourse. One, it is an it's open space. Yes, it is. But if we take the perspective or the clarification that it is going to be used only as a public garden, it remains, in that sense, open land for the most part. Why should we have open, underutilized grassland instead of having a nice horticultural garden with trees, with footpaths, with much more access to use? Second, we spoke about how it's open to the public. Now, it can always remain open to the public. There is no, in that sense, bar from it remaining open to the public. Third, we dealt with equine sports. Now, when we were dealing with equine sports and also on the earlier issue, the equine sports is, I don't think it can be seriously contested, an elite sport. It is not meant for, it is not something that the average Joe can afford in terms of buying a horse, buying membership to one of the clubs and using it. Should they, at the rent of 13 lakhs for 200 acres in central Bombay, enjoy that kind of space at this kind of government subsidy? That's a question that has to be asked. We talk about it being open to the public. Without having toilets, without having facilities, refreshments, etc., how many people, apart from the people living nearby, can actually access that space? Is that not a constructive restriction on the use of the premises? Fourth and fifth, we discussed in terms of it being a catchment area and it being a green lung. Is that taken away by having some kind of public garden over there with trees? Would in fact catchment not be better if you had trees over there? Would the green lung capacity of the place not be better if you had trees over there? So these are all perspectives to keep in mind when you're discussing an issue like this. Now I often say that a good advocate is someone who views his own case dispassionately inside his chamber, but argues it passionately before the court. For that, this is all that you need to do. You need to assess, in that sense, what the two perspectives or 3 or 4 or 5 perspectives are in respect of any particular issue. The real root cause is that there is a lack of public trust, and that mistrust is not misplaced. That we've seen over the decades various opportunities for use of public land. I mean, in the 80s and 90s, it was a mill land development. In the 90s and the noughties, it was about the RA milk colony being encroached into slowly and slowly. After that, recently, we've had the coastal road. Now, each of these has a different perspective. We've dealt with the racecourse today, but each of these does have a different perspective. In the mill land, the question was about private property rights. In the coastal road, it was about decongestion and how important that is in terms of an environmental benefit. About the RA milk colony, it's about mass public transport and the necessity to have it as quickly as possible. The point I am making is that in every argument, there is going to be another side, and we have to effectively, to make an effective case for one side, you have to assess the other side and the other perspective. I leave you with one point that I did want to place, which is there is a concept called the doctrine of public trust. That means that land is held by the government in a case such as this in trust for the public. Now, in trust for the public, according to me, means it must be used not for commercial exploitation, but in a case like this, used for the public good. That would include having a public garden, but not include commercial exploitation. This would include, for example, leaving it as an open space. Open space in a city is something that is at a premium anyway. And one of the Supreme Court decisions that takes the doctrine of public trust from Roman law, then incorporated in English law, and then into Indian law, says that the right to life under Article 21 includes the right to open spaces in public. So really that is something that both the government and advocates of either side must keep in mind while determining what to do with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Shyam. That was really interesting. Does anybody have a question for Shyam? Go ahead.
Hi, Shyam.
Hi.
So how would the public actually learn more, right? Because I agree with you that a lot of media just picks up things, but actually maybe we don't know the full. Like you said, there's two sides to everything. So how do you actually go about learning more or getting more information out to make a better decision?
Actually, that's one of the big problems in terms of what the state attempts to do without having the transparency necessary, without having that openness in terms of proposals of what the plan is. Take as an example that international theme park stroke public garden. I mean, what is an international theme park? Obviously, people have their concerns and then go up in protest when they hear international theme park. So, in terms of what we can do, you have various abilities. You can file a right to information. You can actually try and do a little more research. All this was publicly available. It's not that this is something that I have kind of pulled out from the... so, it is publicly available, but it's required for the government to come clean and say, this is what we propose. This is how it will look when we are done with it. And that's not being done, and that breeds mistrust. There's one there.
There's one more question at the back there.
How can a concerned citizen get a seat at the table at such discussions?
So,
Is there any legal mechanism to include citizens?
no, so in fact, some citizens have, including some dear friends of mine who have discussed this with, have been instrumental in filing the writ petition before a Bombay High Court challenging exactly this acquisition. So that's one way to go about it. The other is to, if you're not a lawyer or if you're not inclined to go to the courts, to build up advocacy to kind of get more and more people aware of what the potential pitfalls were. If there wasn't that outrage, I doubt that they would have gone back on those 2 climb downs that they did. They would not perhaps have given up their free life memberships to them and their friends and family. But it's because of that, it's because of the outrage that's created that they've gone back. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thanks very much, Shyam.